The twin moons of Zelthara hung low in the sky, casting a silver glow over the sprawling alien landscape. The air was thick with the scent of nocturnal flora, and the distant hum of bioluminescent insects created a strange but soothing ambiance. I had spent months on this planet as part of a research exchange, studying Zeltharan biology and customs. By now, I had grown accustomed to the oddities of life here, the floating river stones, the trees that pulsed with energy, and the way the sky turned a deep shade of violet before dawn. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened that night. I was in my quarters, a simple but comfortable dwelling provided by the Zeltharan Council, when the door panel emitted a soft chime. Visitors weren't common at this hour, and I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, I found Zivara standing there, her elongated pupils dilated, her usually smooth violet skin shimmering in the dim light. She looked distressed. Zivara. I frowned, stepping aside to let her in. Is something wrong? She hesitated for only a moment before stepping into my quarters, her movements tense and restless. I had known Zivara since I first arrived. She was one of the few Zeltharans who had taken an interest in my work, and over time, we had formed a bond of friendship. Her curiosity about humans matched my fascination with her species, and despite our differences, we understood each other. Now, though, something was off. Zivara was never this anxious. I require your help, Solon. Her voice was softer than usual, carrying an uncharacteristic urgency. I straightened, instantly more alert. Of course, with what? She took a deep breath, exhaling slowly as if trying to steady herself. My mating season has begun. For a moment I just stared at her, my mind scrambling to process what she had just said. I had heard about Zeltharan mating seasons before. It was a biological necessity, a time when their bodies entered a heightened state of need. If left unmet, it could lead to extreme discomfort, even physical deterioration. But from what I understood, it was something they handled within their own species. I shifted awkwardly. I see. What does that have to do with me? Zivara's golden eyes locked onto mine, unblinking. I have not found a compatible partner among my kind. I fear that if this continues, my body will suffer irreparable harm. There was something almost vulnerable in her expression, a stark contrast to the strong, confident Zivara I was used to. I still don't understand, I said carefully. Are you asking me to help you find someone? She stepped closer. No, Solon. I am asking you to help me. The air in the room suddenly felt much heavier. I took a step back, rubbing the back of my neck. Wait, Zivara, you know I'm not Zeltharan. Would that even work? She gave a slow nod. Yes, you and I share enough genetic compatibility for the process to be effective. It is not about reproduction, but about energy exchange. The bond is temporary. Temporary. That word stood out, easing the tension in my chest just a little. But this was still insane. I was a scientist. I came here to study, not to participate in alien biological rituals. Zivara, I don't know if this is a good idea. She inhaled sharply, and for the first time since I met her, I saw something almost like desperation flicker across her face. I would not ask if I had another option. That gave me pause. Zivara wasn't the type to beg for anything. She was strong, proud, independent. If she was coming to me like this, it meant she truly had nowhere else to turn. I let out a long breath. And this bonding ritual, it's safe? She nodded. Completely. I will guide you through it. There will be no harm to you. I hesitated, my mind warring with itself. Every logical part of me screamed that this was a bad idea. But then I looked at Zivara again, the tension in her shoulders, the way she was trying so hard to maintain control despite what she was going through. I couldn't just abandon her. All right, I said finally. Tell me what I need to do. The relief that washed over Zivara's face was almost startling. She reached out, taking my hand in hers. Her skin was warm, almost too warm, like she was burning from the inside. We must begin now, she said, Before it becomes unbearable. I swallowed hard. Whatever I had just agreed to, I had the sinking feeling that my life was never going to be the same after this. Zivara wasted no time leading me toward the center of my quarters, where the floor was covered with a soft bio-woven material provided by the Zeltharan Council. Despite the cool night air filtering through the ventilation system, the warmth of her skin radiated outward, making the space feel strangely charged with energy. I sat down hesitantly, my pulse quickening. So, how does this work exactly? Zivara lowered herself gracefully, her posture composed despite the visible tension in her body. The ritual is simple in structure but profound in effect, she explained, her voice smooth yet edged with urgency. It requires synchronization. Our bodies must attune to one another for the energy exchange to take place. Right. I let out a breath. And what does that involve? Her golden eyes met mine, and for a long moment she seemed to be considering how to phrase her next words. Then, with deliberate movements, she reached up and traced a pattern across the bare skin of her collarbone with 2 fingers. In response, a faint glow spread outward in intricate bioluminescent lines, illuminating the natural pathways that pulsed beneath her skin. I watched, mesmerized. Zeltharan biology was something I had spent months studying, but witnessing it firsthand like this was completely different from looking at data charts. You must match my rhythm, Zivara continued, shifting closer to me. Your breathing, your heart rate, let them align with mine. The bond will form naturally from there. I exhaled slowly, trying to ignore how intimately close we suddenly were. Zivara's species wasn't prone to unnecessary physical contact. The fact that she was sitting this near, her warmth mingling with mine, was an indication of just how important this was. Okay, I murmured. I'll follow your lead. She gave a small nod, then reached out, pressing her palm flat against my chest. The touch sent an immediate jolt through me, not painful, but foreign, as if I had just stepped too close to a static field. My heart stuttered before falling into a strangely synchronized pattern with the faint pulse beneath her palm. Zivara inhaled deeply, and instinctively I did the same. As we exhaled together, I could feel something shift, as if an invisible thread had been cast between us. Good, she murmured. Now close your eyes. I hesitated, but then did as she asked. For a few moments all I could hear was the gentle hum of the environment, the faint rustling of wind against the outer walls, the distant chime of Zeltharan night creatures. But beneath it all was Zivara, the rhythmic cadence of her breath, the faint flicker of heat where her hand touched my skin, the steady synchronization of something deeper than mere physical presence. Then the warmth grew. It spread outward from my chest, weaving through my limbs like a slow, liquid current. I felt lightheaded, as if I were floating just slightly out of my own body. My senses sharpened. The scent of Zivara's skin, faint blend of something floral and metallic, became more pronounced. The distant hum of the world outside faded, and suddenly, it was as if we were enclosed in a space that belonged to just the 2 of us. Do you feel it? Zivara's voice was softer now, laced with something I couldn't quite name. Yeah, I whispered. What? What is this? The bond forming, she answered. It is how our species connects. It is not simply physical, Solon. It is deeper. It is energy, emotion, sensation, all interwoven into one. I shivered, though not from cold. The warmth had settled into my bones now, comfortable but intense. I could feel Zivara in a way I never had before, not just as a presence beside me, but something more. There was a subtle thread between us now, something unspoken, something ancient. Then Zivara shifted, and suddenly her forehead was pressing lightly against mine. The sensation was electric, not painful, not overwhelming, just consuming. My body tensed instinctively before easing as her warmth bled into me, a silent reassurance. Zivara, I murmured, barely aware of my own voice. You are doing well, she reassured me. Just a little longer. I could hear the strain in her tone now, the sheer willpower it was taking for her to remain composed. She was holding back, whether to keep me from feeling overwhelmed or to maintain control over herself. I wasn't sure. But the fact that she was exerting so much restraint for my sake did something strange to my chest. I didn't realize it would be like this, I admitted, barely able to focus on my words. Her fingers tightened slightly against my chest. Neither did I. There was something raw in the way she said it, something almost hesitant. I wanted to ask what she meant, but before I could, a sudden rush of heat surged through my veins. I sucked in a sharp breath as the energy between us spiked, locking into place with an almost audible snap. The bond had solidified. Zivara inhaled sharply, her body shuddering before slowly relaxing. "It is done," she whispered, sounding almost dazed. I blinked, my vision refocusing as I tried to shake off the lingering sensation of weightlessness. My skin still tingled where she had touched me, my body still buzzing with the after effects of whatever had just happened. When I met Zivara's gaze again, her expression was unreadable. There was relief, yes, but there was also something else, something lingering in the way she looked at me. "Are you okay?" I asked. She exhaled slowly, her eyes searching mine. Then, after a long pause, she nodded. "I am, because of you." I swallowed hard, suddenly hyper-aware of the reality of what I had just done. I had agreed to this thinking it was just a simple favor for a friend, a temporary solution to a biological problem. But as I sat there, still feeling the ghost of her warmth against my skin, I had the sinking realization that I had just crossed a threshold I could never uncross. Something between us had shifted, and I had no idea what that meant for the future. When I woke up, something was wrong. The first thing I noticed was the warmth, not the soft ambient heat of the Zeltharan atmosphere, but something much more tangible, like a living furnace pressed against my side. The second thing I noticed was weight. A heavy presence curled around me, limbs draped over mine, something warm resting against my chest. My eyes flew open and I was met with a sea of violet. Zivara. She was wrapped around me, completely, utterly wrapped around me. One of her arms was slung over my torso, her leg tangled with mine, and the smooth ridge of her forehead was pressed against my collarbone. Her breathing was slow, steady, completely at ease. I froze. My mind reeled back to the night before. The ritual, the energy exchange, the way our presences had merged in some inexplicable way. It had been intense, overwhelming, unlike anything I had ever experienced before. But I had assumed that once it was over, everything would return to normal. This was not normal. Carefully, I tried to move, but the moment I shifted, Zivara's grip tightened. A soft, low sound rumbled in her throat, not quite a growl, but something close, instinctive, protective. "Zivara." My voice was barely above a whisper. Her golden eyes flickered open. For a moment, she looked disoriented, still lost in whatever dream she had been having. Then, as her gaze focused on me, her expression shifted, first to recognition, then to something softer. Something that sent a strange chill down my spine. She exhaled slowly, brushing her forehead against my chest. "You are still here." Her voice was different, gentler, possessive. A knot tightened in my stomach. I cleared my throat, trying to sit up. Yeah, I live here, so..." Zivara abruptly sat up, straddling me before I could move away. Her hands pressed against my shoulders, keeping me in place as she studied me with an unreadable expression. "You feel stable," she murmured, as if assessing me for any changes. "The bond is holding well." The bond. That word sent a fresh wave of unease through me. I had agreed to help her get through her mating season. I had agreed to be part of the ritual, but I hadn't agreed to whatever this was. I swallowed hard. "Right, about that. Zivara, what exactly does this bond mean? Because I thought it was just..." "You are my mate now," she said simply. I blinked. "I'm your what?" She tilted her head slightly, her gaze unwavering. "My mate?" There was a long, heavy silence between us. My brain refused to process what she had just said. Hold on. I pushed against her shoulders, trying to put some space between us, but she didn't budge. You said this was temporary. You said it was just to help you through this phase. She frowned slightly, as if confused by my reaction. Yes, but the bonding ritual is permanent. That is how it works. I stared at her. That is not what you told me. Her expression didn't change. I told you what was necessary at the time. Necessary? Zivara, this is marriage. Alien marriage. You can't just leave that out. She blinked slowly, as if she didn't quite understand why I was making such a big deal out of this. It is not marriage, she corrected. It is deeper, more sacred. A true bond cannot be undone. My stomach dropped. Are you saying this is permanent? She nodded, completely calm. Yes. My pulse skyrocketed. This wasn't happening. This was not happening. I had come to Zelthara as part of a research exchange, hoping to learn about alien cultures and biology. I had not come here to get bonded for life to an alien woman who forgot to mention that tiny little detail before I agreed to help her. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to steady my breathing. Okay, all right. There has to be a way to reverse this. Some kind of ritual to break the bond, right? Zivara's expression darkened. No. Come on, there has to be something. No. This time, her voice carried a firm finality. A bond once formed cannot be severed. To do so would cause harm to both of us. I stopped cold. What do you mean harm? She hesitated, her fingers twitching against my shoulders. The energy link is now part of our beings. If we separate for too long, our bodies will suffer. Weakness, disorientation, pain, and eventually... She trailed off. I stared at her, my mouth dry. Eventually... She didn't answer. She didn't need to answer. The implication was clear. If I left, if I tried to break this, I wouldn't survive. A cold dread settled in my stomach. I had been tricked. Not maliciously, not intentionally, but... Zivara had led me into this without giving me the full truth. She had been desperate, I understood that. But she had changed my life forever without giving me a choice. I took a shaky breath, trying to think rationally. Okay, let's take this one step at a time. You're saying we're stuck like this, that we have to stay close or we both get sick. She nodded. Yes. And I'm supposed to just accept that I'm your mate now? Her expression softened slightly. You will adjust. I will care for you. I let out a short, humorless laugh. That's not the problem, Zivara. The problem is you didn't tell me what I was agreeing to. She lowered her gaze for the first time, her fingers tightening ever so slightly on my shoulders. I was afraid, she admitted. If I told you everything, you would have refused. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. She was right. I would have refused. Another silence stretched between us. Finally, I exhaled, rubbing a hand over my face. This is insane, I muttered. I'm bonded to an alien. I have no way out, and now I have to figure out how to live with this. Zivara shifted slightly, her gaze never leaving mine. You do not have to fear, Solon, she murmured. I will protect you. You are mine now. That last sentence sent a strange shiver through me, half unease, half something I didn't want to examine too closely. I had no idea what my future looked like anymore. But one thing was certain, I wasn't going back to my old life. Not ever. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the wall, trying to process everything. Zivara was moving around my quarters with an ease that made it clear she had no intention of leaving. Every so often, she would glance at me as if assessing my condition, her golden eyes scanning me with a mixture of concern and something else. Possession. I didn't want to believe it, but the way she looked at me now was different than before the ritual. Back then she had seen me as a friend, an ally. Now there was something much deeper in her gaze, something final, unshakable. I ran a hand through my hair. Okay, let's talk about what happens next. Zivara turned toward me, tilting her head slightly. Next? Yes, next. I gestured vaguely. You're telling me I can't leave, I can't break the bond, and we're stuck together now. So what does that actually mean? Am I supposed to just live here forever? Her expression softened. You do not have to stay in one place. We can travel. My home is yours now. That's not... I let out a frustrated sigh. Zivara, I had a life before this. I had plans. You changed everything without giving me a choice. She hesitated, then stepped closer. I understand your anger. I scoffed. Do you? Because I don't think you do. I do, she insisted, her voice calmer than I expected. You feel as though something has been taken from you, that your freedom has been lost. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to breathe evenly. That's exactly how I feel. Zivara watched me carefully, as if weighing her next words. Then she lowered herself to my level, kneeling in front of me. Solon, she said softly, you are not my prisoner. I swallowed. Then what am I? She reached out slowly, deliberately, until her hand rested over mine. Despite my frustration, my body reacted to her touch. A warm, electric hum beneath my skin, the lingering presence of the bond making itself known. You are my mate, she said, and the way she said it sent an involuntary shiver through me. I will not force you to accept that, but the bond has already formed. It cannot be undone. I stared at our hands, at the way her fingers curled slightly around mine. The warmth of our connection was undeniable, pulsing softly like a second heartbeat. This isn't fair, I muttered, more to myself than to her. Zivara exhaled slowly. Perhaps not, but it is done. I pulled my hand away and stood up abruptly, pacing to the other side of the room. There has to be a way to at least weaken the bond. I can't just accept that my life is tied to yours forever. Zivara frowned. If you truly wish to sever it, you would have to be far from me for a long time. The consequences would be severe. I looked at her sharply. How severe? She hesitated. I folded my arms. Zivara, she sighed. At first, exhaustion, confusion. You would feel incomplete. I frowned. That doesn't sound too bad. She gave me a pointed look. Then the pain would start. A deep, aching sickness. Your body would begin to deteriorate. And if we remained apart for too long. She trailed off, and I felt my stomach tighten. You would not survive, she finished. A chill ran through me. That's not possible, I said, shaking my head. I'm human. I shouldn't be affected like that. You are bonded, Zivara said simply. Your biology may be different from mine, but the bond does not care. It has already woven itself into you. I backed up against the wall, gripping the edge of a nearby console. My mind was racing, trying to find a way out of this, some loophole, some scientific method that could reverse this. But I knew Zivara wasn't lying. I could feel it, the way my body already recognized her presence, the way my skin hummed when she was close. Even now, standing several feet away, there was an invisible tether pulling at me, urging me back toward her. I was trapped. Zivara stood slowly, watching me. You are afraid. No kidding, I muttered. She took a step forward. Solon, I did not do this to harm you. Yeah, well, that doesn't change the fact that you did. She flinched slightly, and for the first time since this conversation started, she looked hurt. I almost felt guilty. Almost. Then she straightened. I understand that you need time. Damn right, I need time. She nodded once. Then take it, but know this. I will not abandon you. Even if you refuse this bond, even if you resent me for it, I will remain by your side, because that is what it means to be bonded. Her voice was steady, but there was something raw underneath, something that made my chest tighten against my will. I wanted to be angry. I was angry. But beneath that, I could feel her sincerity. She hadn't done this to trap me. She had done it because she was desperate. And now I was the one with the power to decide what happened next. I exhaled sharply, rubbing my temples. I don't know how to deal with this. You do not have to decide now, Zivara said gently. I looked at her, at the woman who had just completely altered the course of my life. Then I shook my head. I need space, I muttered, turning toward the door. But before I could step outside, a sharp jolt of pain shot through my chest. It wasn't unbearable, but it was enough to make me stop in my tracks. I swallowed hard. Zivara's voice was quiet behind me. It has already begun. I didn't look back. I didn't have to. I could feel the truth of her words in every fiber of my being. I sat on the cold metal bench outside the research outpost, staring up at the sky. The twin moons of Zelthara hung overhead, casting a silvery glow over the landscape. The alien flora swayed in the night breeze, their bioluminescent edges pulsing faintly. It should have been peaceful. It would have been peaceful, if not for the gnawing sensation creeping up my spine. At first I had thought it was just exhaustion, a lingering effect of the ritual. But as the minutes passed, the discomfort deepened. A dull ache had settled in my chest, spreading outward in slow, rhythmic pulses. Not enough to be unbearable, just enough to remind me that something was wrong. Zivara had warned me. Her words echoed in my mind. If we remain apart for too long, you would not survive. I clenched my fists. This was ridiculous. There was no way a bond, some mystical, biological, energy-based whatever, could have this much control over me. I was human. I shouldn't be affected like this. But the longer I sat here, the worse it got. I swallowed hard, rubbing at my sternum. My skin felt sensitive, like I was coming down with a fever. And underneath it all, an unsettling awareness lingered, an emptiness where something should be, a void that hadn't existed before. My mind kept drifting back to Zivara, not just as a thought, but as a presence. I could feel her even from a distance. It wasn't conscious, not exactly, but it was there, like an invisible thread pulling at me, warning me that I was straying too far. I gritted my teeth. This wasn't fair. I hadn't asked for this, I hadn't agreed to this. And now my own body was betraying me, demanding something I wasn't ready to accept. The outpost door hissed open behind me. I didn't turn around. I already knew who it was. Footsteps approached, light, deliberate. Then a pause. You are unwell. Zivara's voice was calm, but there was a hint of strain beneath it. I didn't answer. She stepped closer. Solon, I exhaled sharply. I just needed some air. You are in pain. I shook my head. I'm fine. She didn't respond right away. I could feel her studying me, analyzing every shift in my posture, every unsteady breath. Then, slowly, she knelt beside me. I stiffened as she reached out, her fingertips hovering just over my hand. May I? The question surprised me. Zivara rarely asked for anything. She was direct, confident, certain. But now, there was hesitation in her voice. For a moment I considered pulling away, but the truth was I was in pain, and I had the sinking feeling that no amount of stubbornness would make it stop. I sighed. Go ahead. Her fingers brushed against mine, and the relief was instant. It was subtle, like a cool wave washing over me. The ache in my chest dulled. The tension in my limbs faded. My breathing steadied without me even realizing it. I swallowed hard. Zivara exhaled, closing her eyes. You should not have left. I pulled my hand away, and the discomfort crept back immediately. Not as strong as before, but noticeable. That's exactly the problem, I muttered. I can't even be alone without feeling like I'm dying. Zivara opened her eyes, watching me carefully. It will lessen. When? She hesitated. With time, I scoffed. That's not an answer. It is the only answer I have. I stood up abruptly, pacing a few steps away. This isn't sustainable, Zivara. I can't live like this. I can't have my body shutting down every time I try to get some distance. She stood as well. You are still adjusting. Your body and mind are resisting the bond, but it is already a part of you. Fighting it will only cause suffering. I turned to her, frustrated. And what if I don't want this bond? What if I don't want you? Her expression remained unreadable, but something in her eyes flickered. Want and need are not always the same. My stomach twisted. That's not fair. She stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. Neither is life. I shook my head, running a hand through my hair. You don't get it, Zivara. You had a choice. You knew what this would mean. I didn't. Silence stretched between us. Then she said something I didn't expect. You are right. I blinked. What? She exhaled, folding her arms. You are right. I did not give you a choice. I was desperate. I acted selfishly. Her admission threw me off balance. I had expected her to argue, to push back. Instead, she was just agreeing with me. I frowned. Then why aren't you doing anything to fix it? Zivara held my gaze. Because I cannot fix it. The bond is already formed. There is no reversal, no escape, only adaptation. I let out a humorless laugh. Great. So I'm just supposed to accept this? She tilted her head slightly. Would that truly be so terrible? I opened my mouth to answer, but I hesitated, because I didn't know. The logical part of me screamed that this was wrong, that I should be furious. But the part of me that had felt the unbearable emptiness just minutes ago, that part was relieved to have her near again, and that scared me more than anything. Zivara took a slow step forward. You may not believe me, Solon, but I do not wish for you to suffer. If I could make this easier for you, I would. I swallowed hard. Then what can you do? She considered for a moment. Then softly she said, I can give you time. My chest tightened. Time for what? To come to terms with what is. I let out a shaky breath, rubbing my temple. And if I don't? Her gaze didn't waver. Then I will wait. Something in her voice sent a shiver down my spine. She wasn't threatening me. She wasn't trying to force me into anything. She was simply stating a fact. No matter what I did, no matter how much I resisted, she would wait for me. I looked away, my thoughts a tangled mess. I didn't know what to do. All I knew was that despite everything, despite my anger and my frustration, I wasn't sure I wanted to walk away anymore. I sat in my quarters, staring at my reflection in the small metallic mirror mounted on the wall. I looked the same messy hair, same tired eyes, but I didn't feel like the same person anymore. Everything had changed, and no matter how much I wanted to deny it, I couldn't escape that truth. The bond was real. I had tried to fight it. I had tried to ignore it. But the moment I had stepped outside, the moment I had put even the smallest distance between myself and Zivara, my body had betrayed me. The dull ache in my chest, the creeping emptiness. It was a constant reminder that I wasn't just me anymore. I was us. The thought sent a shudder through me. I exhaled sharply, pushing back from the mirror and rubbing my temples. I needed to clear my head. With a sigh, I grabbed my jacket and stepped out into the corridor. The ship was quiet, its dim lighting casting long shadows along the walls. Zivara was nowhere to be seen, and for a moment I let myself enjoy the silence. But even without seeing her, I felt her, a steady pulse in the back of my mind like an invisible thread connecting us. It wasn't intrusive, not exactly. It was just there. A constant presence. I didn't even know if she was awake or asleep, but I knew without a doubt that she was somewhere close. I hated how natural it felt. I made my way to the observation deck, hoping the view of deep space would give me some kind of perspective. The stars stretched out infinitely, a vast sea of darkness and distant light. I used to love this sight. It used to remind me how small my problems really were in the grand scheme of things. Now it just reminded me how trapped I was. The doors behind me slid open with a quiet hiss. I didn't have to turn around to know who it was. Zivara stepped onto the deck, her presence settling into the space like a quiet storm. She didn't speak right away. Instead, She simply stood beside me, gazing out at the stars. For a few moments, we existed in silence. Then she said softly, "You have been restless." I scoffed. "No kidding." Her golden eyes flicked to me, studying my face. "You still resist." I clenched my jaw. "Of course I do. Do you really expect me to just accept that my entire life is tied to you now?" Zivara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I expect you to be honest with yourself." I frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" She turned fully toward me. "You say you do not want this bond. You say you resent what has happened. But tell me, Solon, if you were truly given a choice right now, would you leave?" I opened my mouth to respond. Then I hesitated. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to tell her that I would walk away in a heartbeat if given the chance, that I would undo everything, go back to my old life, forget this ever happened. But the words wouldn't come, because deep down, I wasn't sure they were true. I swallowed hard, looking away. "That's not the point." "It is precisely the point," Zivara said, her voice steady. "You are angry because you did not choose this. But what if the choice had been yours? What if, before the ritual, I had asked you to bond with me?" I let out a humorless laugh. "Then I would have said no." She tilted her head slightly. "Would you?" I turned to her, frowning. "Of course I would have. I didn't want this, Zivara." She stepped closer, and I felt the heat of her presence even before she touched me. "But do you want me?" My breath caught in my throat. The question hit deeper than I wanted to admit. Because the truth was, I didn't know. I had spent so much time resisting, so much time fighting against this reality, that I hadn't stopped to ask myself what I actually felt. Yes, I was angry. Yes, I hated that my choice had been taken from me. But did I hate her? I stared at her, at the intensity in her golden eyes, at the way she watched me like I was the only thing in the universe that mattered. And I realized something terrifying. I didn't want to leave. I wanted her, maybe not the bond, maybe not the circumstances. But her? I exhaled sharply, rubbing the back of my neck. "I don't know, Zivara." She was silent for a long moment. Then softly she said, "That is enough." I frowned. "What?" She reached out, brushing her fingers against my hand. "You do not have to have all the answers now. I will not ask you to love me. I will not ask you to love me. I will not ask you to accept this bond." Her grip tightened just slightly. "But I will ask you to stop lying to yourself." I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. Zivara's voice dropped lower, almost a whisper. "You do not hate me." I closed my eyes. She was right. I had spent so much energy convincing myself that I was a victim in all of this, that I hadn't allowed myself to acknowledge the truth. I didn't hate her. If anything, I was drawn to her. Not just because of the bond, not just because of the physical pull, but because she had been there for me. Because she had waited. Because in her own way, she had chosen me. I took a shaky breath, finally meeting her gaze again. "I don't hate you," I admitted quietly. Zivara's expression softened. "I know." A strange sense of relief washed over me. I wasn't ready to say anything more than that. I wasn't ready to fully accept what had happened to me. But for the first time since the ritual, I wasn't trying to run away. Maybe that was enough. I sat on the floor of my quarters, my back against the cool metal wall, staring at my hands. They were steady now, no trembling, no weakness. The ache in my chest had faded, leaving behind something strange, something I didn't quite understand yet. For days I had fought this. I had told myself I was still me, that nothing had changed. But that was a lie, wasn't it? Something had changed. I wasn't just Solon anymore. I was Solon, bonded to Zivara, and no matter how much I tried to pretend otherwise, the truth was sinking into me like ink in water. I exhaled sharply and leaned my head back. Was it really so bad? The door to my quarters hissed open. I didn't even need to look to know it was her. I could feel her presence, like a warm thread pulling at the edge of my awareness. It wasn't intrusive, not anymore. Just there. A quiet, constant thing like the hum of a starship engine. Zivara stepped inside, her movements deliberate and silent. "You are calmer." I let out a dry chuckle. "Took me long enough, huh?" She tilted her head, watching me closely. "It is a process," I sighed, rubbing my face. "You make it sound so simple." "It is not simple," she said, moving closer. "But it is necessary." I glanced up at her. "For you or for me?" She hesitated before answering. "Both." That threw me off. I had spent so much time focused on my own reaction to this bond that I hadn't considered what it meant for her. Sure, she had initiated the ritual, but she hadn't done it lightly. She had needed me, desperately enough to break the rules of her own people. And now, she was tied to me just as much as I was tied to her. I studied her for a long moment. She looked the same. Elegant, composed, strong. But there was something beneath it all, something I had been too blind to see before. A quiet vulnerability. Zivara was always so controlled, so certain, but she had risked everything for this. For me. I ran a hand through my hair. "You said the bond can't be undone." She nodded. I swallowed hard. "But what does that actually mean for us?" Zivara stepped forward, lowering herself to the floor beside me. She didn't touch me, but I could feel her warmth. She was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "It means," she said finally, "that no matter where we go, no matter what we do, we are connected." I nodded slowly. "I get that. But how connected? What happens if I don't know, if I decide to leave? If I go back to my old life?" A shadow crossed her face. "Then you would suffer." I frowned. "Like before? The pain?" "Yes." I hesitated. "And you?" She was quiet for a long time. Then, barely above a whisper, she said, "Worse." My stomach twisted. I had thought I was the only one struggling with this. I had assumed that because Zivara had chosen this, she was fine with it. But now, I wasn't so sure. I studied her face, searching for something, some crack in her usual composure. "You never told me it would hurt you too," I said. She met my gaze, her expression unreadable. "You never asked." I exhaled, looking away. "That's not fair." She didn't respond. A heavy silence settled between us, filled with things neither of us knew how to say. Finally, I broke it. "What do you want from me, Zivara?" She was still for a long moment. Then, softly, she said, "I want you to live." I blinked. "What?" She turned toward me fully, her golden eyes intense. "I do not wish for you to suffer, Solin. I do not want you to feel trapped. That was never my intention." I swallowed. "Then why?" "Because I was afraid," she admitted, her voice quieter now. "Afraid of losing you." My breath caught in my throat. She had always seemed so unshakable, so sure of herself. But now, sitting here in the dim light of my quarters, she looked almost fragile. I didn't know what to do with that. "I'm still me," I murmured. Zivara nodded. "Yes." I ran a hand over my face. "But I don't feel like me anymore." Her gaze softened. "Then tell me, what do you feel like?" I hesitated. I had spent so much time resisting, pushing her away, that I hadn't actually taken the time to think about what I was feeling. And now that I did, I didn't know how to explain it. I felt different, not worse, not broken, just changed, like a puzzle piece that had been shifted into a new position. I sighed. "I don't know, Zivara. I just know that I can't pretend this isn't real anymore." A small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. "That is enough." I stared at her, my chest tightening. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to hold on to my frustration, my resentment, but it was getting harder. Because the truth was, I didn't hate this, I didn't hate her. If anything, I might have already started to need her, and that terrified me more than anything. Zivara stood at the viewport, her golden eyes reflecting the endless expanse of space beyond. She was quiet, her posture relaxed in a way I hadn't seen before. For once, there was no tension between us, no resistance, just peace. I stepped up beside her, my hands tucked into my pockets. The ship hummed softly beneath us, the steady pulse of the engines almost comforting. "It's beautiful," I murmured. She turned her head slightly, watching me. "You have looked at these stars many times before." I let out a small chuckle. "Yeah, but I don't know. They look different now." She tilted her head. "How so?" I hesitated, then shrugged. "I guess they don't feel so empty anymore." Zivara studied me for a long moment. Then slowly a soft smile curved her lips. It was rare, so rare that it caught me off guard. I had spent so much time thinking of her as this untouchable force, this warrior who had bound herself to me out of necessity. But here now, she wasn't just a warrior, she was Zivara, and I, somehow, had become the one person she had chosen to share this with. I exhaled, rubbing the back of my neck. "I guess I should probably stop fighting this, huh?" Zivara's smile didn't fade. "Only if you wish to." I sighed. "You always say things like that, like I still have a choice." She nodded. "Because you do." I turned to her fully. "But the bond does not control your heart," she interrupted gently. "It only connects us. What we choose to be to each other, that is our decision." I stared at her, something warm settling in my chest. For so long, I had seen the bond as a cage, a force that had taken my choices away. But Zivara had never treated it that way. She had given me space. She had let me fight, let me struggle because she wanted me to come to her willingly. She had never asked me to love her. But now, standing here beside her, I realized something I hadn't been ready to admit before. I did love her, not because of the bond, not because of the connection humming between us, but because she was her, strong, fierce, unwavering, and yet, when it came to me, endlessly patient. I took a slow breath. "So, what happens now?" Zivara's eyes softened. "Now, we live." I chuckled. "That's simple, huh?" She tilted her head. "Why must it be complicated?" I smirked. "I guess it doesn't have to be." She extended a hand. Not in demand, not an expectation, just an invitation, a choice. For the first time since this all began, I reached for her without hesitation. Her fingers curled around mine, warm and steady. And in that moment, I knew. I wasn't trapped. I was exactly where I was meant to be. Maybe the stars had changed. Or maybe I finally had someone to share them with. Either way, I was done fighting. I had already found my home.